All right, we're live.
We're live. Well, welcome to our live stream with Bob Mac 3D, Battleground HD, and Flank March Miniatures. You'll be well aware that Bob Mac 3D and Flank March have Kickstarters running at the moment. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about that, but not too much. If you're interested, just as soon as we finish here, the links will appear in the description section underneath the video, and you can give it a click and have a look what we're talking about. So we've got Brad, who does Battleground HD, and Bob Mac 3D. Say hello, Brad.
Hi, guys.
We've got Stefan from Flank March Miniatures.
Hello.
Who's not awake? Oh, yeah, there we go. Very good. Well done. And I'm Bob from Bob Mac 3D. So, Stefan, how's your Kickstarter going?
Very good. Absolutely, yeah, very, very good. Lots of enthusiasm for it. 27 out of 28 stretch goals already unlocked, which is sort of the kind of thing we see 2 weeks into most of the other ones. So very positive. Yeah, very good.
Awesome. It looks like it's going really well, actually. From an outsider's viewpoint, I had Kickstarter jealousy.
It's felt like a 2-week campaign compressed into one single weekend at the moment. A lot of my plans for the weekend went out the window as I was sat doing stretch goal updates.
Fair enough. All
which
sounds
is a good problem to have. Yeah.
Brad, so you launched Fulda Gap. Have I got that right?
So Fulda Gap is not a Kickstarter. It's just a product that we're releasing, and I haven't released it yet. I am so close. I've spent all weekend working on it. It's pretty cool. It's pretty fun, but you'll probably see it tomorrow launched.
Tomorrow. Oh, we shall look forward to that.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll talk about the Bob Mac 3D Kickstarter, which is also going very well. I believe it's probably at this point in time, so 2 days or so into the Kickstarter, the best we've ever done. We've just ticked over 100 backers. It's making money. What we're on 5. We got to the 6th Kickstarter yet, Brad? Do you know? Not Kickstarter, stretch goal. I know what I'm talking about.
And as of this morning, we're close, but we're not quite there yet.
Not quite there yet, but I'm sure by the time this video is finished, some enthusiastic person will click pledge.
Hopefully.
Which goal are we nearly at? What's the next one to unlock?
Now, at least he's asking difficult questions.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah.
You have, because I don't know.
I know you were going to do that.
Is it the grenade launcher for the FAV? Because that's the one I've been looking forward to. I like any new gun for the FAV is good.
We should discuss. I'll look it up here real quick. I'm looking right now. Our next Kickstarter to unlock is, well, the grenade launcher's already unlocked. So
already done.
Grenade launcher there. But the one that's about to be unlocked is the one I think is the most ridiculous. And that's the rocket launchers on the FAV.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, how are you supposed to aim this?
It's a very good question. They're fixed. I can tell you. It doesn't even look like they elevate.
I think you're meant to fire them off while going over a jump midair.
Right. So what people don't realize is that the movie with Chuck Norris, Invasion USA, is actually a DARPA-funded research project. Have you guys seen this movie? It's the one.
I have not seen that one.
Motorcycles that have like rockets in the handlebars.
Brilliant.
It's awesome, right? Any of those 80s American movies that portrayed the American military as having jet bikes and cool stuff like that. I think so.
It's definitely a good pair of Kickstarters for that. If you like Arnie and Commando, we've already got the Flash incendiary rocket launcher.
Yeah.
Perfect.
The 4-barrel job.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
And I think this is a great transition to, what's cool about the U.S. Army in the 1980s. And I think the concept of Invasion USA or the thought of motorcycles with rockets kind of fits with why I like the U.S. Army in the 80s.
Well, go on, expand on that, because I, much as I enjoy the humor behind it all of that sort of pseudo fantasy stuff completely leaves me cold, to be fair.
I know it does, Bob. You are like this realistic gamer. But from my viewpoint, I grew up, and most of my childhood, in the 80s, I was in high school and college. But early 80s, late 70s, when the transformation was really starting to happen, you saw it a lot in popular culture. And I'm talking about G.I. Joe. I'm talking about cartoons, movies, and there was just this mind shift in America from what was before, right? We were leaving the Vietnam War. We were leaving the protests. The anti-army world kind of shifted in that late 70s. And as a kid, it was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying that shift as well comes at the same time where the Soviets have sort of taken advantage of that Vietnam era, and you see a lot of the modernization happening in the American army is a reaction to all the kind of futuristic at the time seeming tanks that have just come out in the Soviet army 5 years before?
And I find it super fascinating from a historic standpoint, which is this concept between AirLand battle and Army 86. And AirLand battle was this, I guess the best thing to say is it's a study, it's a research project that the U.S. Army implemented about. We've noticed that the Soviets have leaped forward in technology while we were busy with Vietnam. And this came out in the Yom Kippur War, where they saw the missile technology, they saw their, tanks getting destroyed. It really changed the mentality at the Pentagon, saying, oh, I guess we have to pay more attention now to Europe than we ever did before. And so they started this AirLand battle, and out of AirLand battle came Army 86 and all these new American technologies. Now, a lot of these technologies were going on, but AirLand battle and Army 86 gave it focus and helped say, okay, we want this one, the rest we don't care, let's move forward. And that story is fascinating. It's so fascinating that the U.S. Army actually made a history of AirLand battle document that talks about it. And if you read it, it's not too long, really nice read. It really explains everything, and it's pretty fun.
Yes. I think what's interesting about the change is it's a change from an emphasis on sort of firepower, and they're sort of planning an attritional battle near the border as part of active defense, which is what came before AirLand battle, if I'm right. Tell me if I'm wrong. And as a wargamer, it's kind of exciting that they're moving towards this very maneuver-based plan of how they're going to fight. So if you like to be a really active wargamer in terms of tactics and things like that, it's good in that sense. You can do a lot of that sort of thing.
Well, that gives you an interesting question, doesn't it, actually? Because should you, as a historical wargamer, and we're taking the Cold War as being at least pseudo-historical here, should you, as a historical wargamer, how much should you be, what's the word I'm looking for? Stymied? That's not the right word. How much should you follow the doctrine of the time, and how much should it be, well, actually, I can do better than the doctrine of the time with this equipment, and I'm going to try it my way? And where does that fit? If you're trying it your way, is that an historical battle? What do you think?
It's a good question. I'd say the interesting thing is how much was the doctrine, an actual doctrine? Was it set in stone? Because my understanding is you can think of it as this idea of going from active defense, which is about firepower, to AirLand battle, which is about depth and maneuver. But it's really a political battle in the US Army at the time. And some people believe in one, some people believe in the other. And within every unit, there's a balance of those two things. So they're testing both out, and they are historically thinking of both ideas. So it's completely historical to try it out both ways, because that's what the US Army was doing at the time.
Okay.
That what I think is, we were just saying before this call, there's this way you can look at the Cold War in the 80s of the sort of NATO nightmare on one side of what they imagine the Soviet Union might be, and the Soviet nightmare on the other side of Abrams going towards Poland, things like that. And anywhere in that spectrum in between, you can wargame in there, and it is plausible things that could have happened. And they're definitely all interesting to think about.
Yeah, you could. It's very notable that every single outline of a Soviet exercise I have ever seen starts with a NATO invasion of East Germany. They were absolutely, both sides were expecting the other to be the aggressor.
Exactly,
which I find quite fascinating.
Yeah, it's fascinating because is it propaganda, right? You want your troops to believe that ultimately, while they're sitting there, they're going to be invaded, and this is about protection, not about attacking an innocent country.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's a propaganda stance, but I guess, and it is just a guess, I don't know. I guess both sides pretty much believed they were in the right, and that they were standing in the way of a global aggressor.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you have to, right? To have that many troops, that much economy moving towards that army, the military exercises. Those people, I assume that you have enough military together. That military has to believe they're doing the right thing.
Well, that's sort of interesting. I did a bunch of research about why battles are won. Well, battle winning. Oh, that's not quite right. Firstly, I started with why do people run away? The converse of that is what makes people win battles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I did a whole bunch of research, and it's on my website if anybody really wants to look at it. And one of the factors I looked at was fanaticism or belief in your cause.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes a difference if you're a fanatic. Yeah. But for the vast majority, it just didn't feature at all. Which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
One presumes if you can get your army moving, and once they're actually moving, it doesn't make that much difference.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I don't know. But we've gone really top level strategic here, haven't we? and Brad, it might be pointed out, at the very least, is a skirmish gamer. So why don't we talk a little bit about what in the tactical realm, besides jet-powered motorbikes, Brad, what in the tactical realm makes the US Army interesting to play? Go on, Brad, talk to me about it.
You know, it's interesting to always think about this, because at the end of the day, I'll play any army, anytime. I have a blast. And when we do our play testing for Battleground HD, most of the people who come want to play the Americans. And so I tend to always play the Soviets or whoever's on the other side. So I can really only talk about receiving the firepower of the Americans. But there is something from a tactical perspective at this point in time, and we're talking about Bradley Abrams kind of army, that is a lot of fun to play in comparison to, let's say, a BMP-1, or actually we're playing now in Fulda Firestorm BMP-2s, right? And that Bradley's a fun vehicle to play in a skirmish battle, right? You've got that 25 millimeter chain gun that is a blast to use to, sorry, the pun, and then the tow launcher and the mobility, right? Just the speed and mobility that you can use and bring to the table is a lot of fun. We won't even mention the Abrams, right? And what's fascinating about the Abrams is when you say Abrams, we're thinking in our heads, the Abrams we know today, right? 120 millimeter gun, all this up armor, all this sophisticated equipment. But the time that we're playing, they have the IP M1, the improved M1, but it's the 105 millimeter gun. And they have a little bit better armor than the original, but this isn't like a battlefield dominating vehicle that kills everything that's the king. It is pretty much on par with the T-80 at this point.
Well, I wouldn't even say it was that good, actually.
Right, right.
The basic Mark 1 Abrams doesn't have a lot of armor on it.
Yeah.
It will stop a Saga because that's what it was designed to do.
Yeah.
It'll hit things because it's got a really nice fire control system, but it's only 105. It's not as good as its rep would suggest.
Yeah, right. Yep. Which is fascinating because that bears out in the game. And when we invite play testers over and they come down, they're like, I got an M1. I am just going to park this in the middle of the battlefield. No one's going to be able to touch me. And you're like, that's not really true here. I would be very, very careful. But that's fun. It's fun because it is a moment you can kind of learn about it and understand it, that tank was built for speed, right?
Mm-hmm.
They put that big turbine engine in there so that they could get that thing going fast, which, Stefan, goes back to your point, is about maneuver. And it was, about being able to react to battlefield conditions, not stand there as a pillbox.
Absolutely.
So, Stefan, as our resident infantry man, you're not an infantry man, a man who does infantry is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
What? I mean, tell us about the American infantry.
I was just going to say, it's the interesting thing of what Brad's saying is I find that what draws me sometimes to a wargaming force isn't necessarily the positives that they have. Often it's the drawbacks and the challenges that you've got to overcome to win. And the counterpoint to the Bradley and all the firepower you get there in the infantry is that they've really had to cut down the size of the American infantry squad to achieve that. I think you can only really fit 6 people in the back of a Bradley. Is that right?
Yeah, sounds about right.
So you've gone from an American squad of 11 men at the end of the 70s in TO&E, in theory. You've cut that all the way down to 6 men. They've kept most of their firepower because all the machine guns, all the grenade launchers, things like that are still there. But the actual manpower is massively reduced. So I'd be interested to know, in the games you've played so far, Brad, has that been an issue? Have the American players found that they've got a lot of firepower, but as soon as the return fire comes in, any casualties they're taking, they sort of really feel quite heavily? Because I know that has been an aspect of even the Soviet players in the games I've played who have a 7-man squad, they very quickly, you can feel that they're losing oomph as soon as 1 or 2 men get taken out. So has that been a factor?
Absolutely, yes. I will tell you that what I see from gaming in general in the 80s, when I do skirmish Cold War, is that if you can get your infantry into cover, into buildings, they're hard to dig out, right? They're spread out. They usually have some kind of anti-armor capability, whether that's a law rocket or a dragon. At least they threaten BMPs and smaller vehicles, right? And so everybody gets scared of that. So if they get dug in, they're hard to dig out. But when you only have 6 guys compared to 11, there's not a lot of guys to dig in. And so you will traditionally take casualties getting to the point where you can dig in, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's a big difference to get to that point with, let's say, 9 guys instead of 3 guys. All of a sudden, your ability to threaten some kind of axis really changes because your AT weapons didn't make it, right? Or the machine gun didn't go with you. It's even worse in the Fulda Firestorm pack focuses on the 11th ACR, right? And they were a cavalry regiment of scouts. Well, the scout version of the Bradley, which is the M3, only held 2 guys. And really, they were there to reload the tow launcher. And so from an 11th ACR perspective, there are no dismounts to be able to put into buildings or do so. It is all maneuver. And when you come down to game, it's almost as if there's too many eggs in one basket. You have no choice of what you're doing because you just don't have the dismounts. It's very interesting.
So what tactics can you use to get around that?
Yeah, good questions.
Good question.
I don't do this. I don't do this skirmish type stuff. So what tactics you can use?
I think you really do have to play to the strength that we've already said of you have to make as much use of that firepower as you can.
Yep.
And when you compare the squad to even most other squads within NATO, the amount of specialist weapons going on in there is really high. You've got 2 grenade launchers. By the time you're in the Bradley, in theory, you've got 2 M249 support weapon, automatic weapon type things, and a guy with an M47 Dragon. So almost everyone in the squad has some sort of enhanced firepower at some point, some kind. So I've only played a few games with the Americans so far at Broadside, which was a show in the UK a few weeks ago. But the people who played that, the ones who got their 50 cal going on the M113, because we were playing with M113 platoons, and got their fire laid down, it is really devastating compared to even a British infantry squad with semi-automatic SLRs and a GPMG. It's a lot of firepower going down. So you've really got to make use of that. Although I will say the tricky part is, whereas most NATO forces you're working with a 2-team kind of squad moving around, that 6-man team or 6-man squad is one big team. Am I right in saying that, Brad? It's just one sort of maneuver unit.
Yeah.
So you can't do the pepper potting of having some machine guns back and some rifles going forward, because if you do that, there's only sort of one or two riflemen in the squad.
One poor lonesome bloke on his own,
exactly
at the front. Yes,
you'd be sending out, that one dude. Go on, then you can go put a grenade in there. It's not enough, and you don't have the redundancy of the casualties to drive you forward. So you have to be very, very tactical and very decisive with the maneuvers you make, because you don't have much of a reserve left.
Well, and it was assumed too that the concept you're talking about, where the machine gun lays down the suppressing fire and the maneuver element moves, the thought process was the Bradley was that base of fire.
Yeah, because it's no longer a personnel carrier. The M113 is a personnel carrier.
Right.
The Bradley is the Bradley fighting vehicle, right? So it's meant to be there, actually supporting the infantry at close range.
And of course, but it ain't got a great deal of armor on it, has it?
No. And this is what I find really interesting about playing it, is a lot of people come to it and they think, come to Cold War gaming at Skirmish, and they think, oh, these are much better tanks in theory than a World War II tank in their mind. But if you're playing a skirmish game, it tends to be sort of urban. You're not playing a skirmish game with a big open field. There's buildings around, there's cover, and you find that RPG-7, it's going to get you. If you play it wrong, the RPG-7 can go through you. In fact, a heavy machine gun can go through most vehicles that are within an infantry unit. It's really only tanks that you're playing that can defend against.
Bradley not keep one out from the front?
A Bradley could. Bradley's got
Bradley's armor.
A bit more capability.
It's that front is the key word, right?
Front.
Exactly.
And one of the fun things about skirmish gaming that I find to be enjoyable is that I like puzzles on the battlefield, right? I like that stress that's there that it gives me. And the concept that, let's say you understand that Bradley can shrug off an RPG-7 from the front, but I'm vulnerable at any side. So when you're playing that Bradley, or I'm watching people play the Bradley, to go through their mind, they're typically either aggressive, hey, I don't care, I'm going to go for my objective, or they worry about, how do I face this so that I notice there's people coming up on this side, I'm going to face it this way, or, oh my gosh, this over here, I'm going to face it this way. They get all worried about it. And I always find it totally fascinating about how some gamers protect what they have on the board. And so that Bradley, they believe it's this cool unit and they will want to protect it at all costs because this is the coolest thing. And I just love watching that play. I really do.
Sounds good.
Another thing I was going to raise, as I like to be quite an efficient wargamer. I quite like forces that can do more than one role at the same time. And I think more than any Cold War force I've worked on so far, if you collect a platoon of American infantry, you can do about 10 different types of platoon just by swapping in a few different things. So you can do, we've mostly been talking about mechanized sort of heavy division infantry.
Yep.
You can do lighter stuff. You can do air mobile and airborne, pretty much the same uniform. There's not that much difference, pretty much the same equipment with a few variations. Mounted infantry, rear area stuff like military police. If you're doing a scenario around any of the many military facilities the US Army had in West Germany, you can do that sort of thing. You don't have to collect a completely different force for your very niche sort of US Air Force security platoon or something. You can do it all with one painted up platoon of American infantry. They're really, really flexible in that regard.
That's quite interesting, actually. It brings me to my next thing to talk about, because the USAF used the V100, if I remember rightly, for their security vehicle, which at the moment nobody makes. So the next question to both of you is, Bob Mac 3D don't half make a lot of American vehicles. We don't make them all, though. So if there was one thing that you'd want for your American force that ain't out there yet, what would you pick, Brad?
Besides the Gamma Goat, right?
Well, we may get to the Gamma Goat. We just need all those nice people out there to put their hands in their pockets.
True. And the Gamma Goat is more of a 70s, early 80s thing.
No, they lasted all the way through to the end. Yeah, less and less commonly, I think, but there was still some about.
Which gives them good marks, right? That they lasted that long, or the Army was reluctant.
I think they bought so many of them they couldn't afford to replace them, because by all accounts they were pretty shite.
Yeah, and their replacement is probably a model that would be interesting to do. And the Americans bought in fleets before the Humvee was a big vehicle. Before the Humvee was introduced, the vehicle that was everywhere was this American. It was like the Chevy Blazer.
Oh, what, the pickup truck? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and it had the back on it too. So they had like the pickup truck version, and then they had the SUV version, and these were they were stock, U.S. bought off the car lot kind of things, but they sprayed them, in camouflage. And if you went to a base in the 80s, there were thousands of these things. Everybody was driving these around instead of Jeeps, right, in the mid to late 80s.
It's definitely one of those things where my perception of the 80s is everyone is rolling around in a Humvee. I think it was right at the start of Reforger research. A veteran of the 80s somewhere said to me, we were in this pickup. I was like, oh, really? I've never really heard of this. And as soon as you're aware of it, you realize you just think it's a civilian car in the background of every single photo you see of anyone doing anything in the US military in the 80s. There's this pickup in the background. And you're like, wow, yeah, they really are absolutely ubiquitous.
Peacetime,
everywhere.
when you're driving on roads, it's
great idea.
fine. And it's cheap.
Yeah. It's cheap, right? Maintenance is cheap. Gas is cheap. It's cheap, right?
It's a cheap.
And that, to a big army, that makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
But you're right. I don't know that anybody does a model of them. What about you, Stefan? Any sort of model you think we really need?
Probably the most excited I've been recently was watching Battle Order. Very good YouTube channel. If you're not watching it, you should go watch Battle Order. Their video, which came out the night before Salute, a war game show in the UK, about 9th Motorized Division, rocking around in the pre-Humvee FAV that you're doing.
Yep.
The other part I thought was very, very cool about that. Scout bike, guy on a dirt bike with a grease gun, rocking that. That's what I want to see.
You want to see a dirt bike?
Strong look. Absolutely.
Yeah, you're back to Brad's blooming rocket bikes again, aren't you?
And if we can strap the rocket launcher, if the rocket launcher from the FAV can go on the back of it, so it does look like a GI Joe tool, so even better. Yeah.
You can tell your skirmishes. You see, I don't know, if it hasn't got tracks, I'm not entirely sure I'm interested.
Well, I think it's again, going back to the challenge, I was just before this video, I was reading about how the light divisions were handled in Division 86, and they were almost scrapped. They almost completely got rid of them, and it's only really the Iranian Revolution and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan that makes the US military go from a mindset of we're not doing another Vietnam to maybe you want to maintain that capacity just in case you want to go somewhere like off the top of my head, where should you go? Grenada or Panama. If you had to do that for some reason, I don't know why they would, but maybe they would.
I don't think they did either.
No, and they suddenly go, okay, maybe we need to keep this, but we can't do what we're doing in the heavy division of just make everything armored and even more firepower, even better guns. We have to rely purely on technology and thinking of new ways to fight and new tactics. And I think that drawback where you can't rely on firepower, you have to find a more intelligent way to fight, I think is what makes them a cool force. They are really interesting.
I'd agree. The 9th Light Infantry Division is really interesting because, well, you're going to dump this thing quickly, which is the whole point, in front of something big and Soviet and armored. And I don't think they ever seriously thought they'd stop it, but they are about, well, we need to hold them up for a week while we get some proper tanks in. And that's quite a tall order.
You also sort of think, what's a cool scenario where you could use them? And I was thinking the other day about it in this idea of a really mobile, really high maneuver war that the Germans and the French are really thinking about it. What if everyone is mixed up and it's all become very confused? Is there a place there where you can play as a really highly mobile fighting force that is relying on not being where you expect, the sort of LRDG from World War II, if you're a big fan of that sort of thing, if you can get into the rear area, what can they do there? Because that's what AirLand battle is all about.
Yeah.
If you can get into the enemy rear, can you stop an attack by just stopping the reinforcements coming forward?
Yeah, I mean, that was really what the Apaches, or before that, the Cobras were for, wasn't it? That's really what the Americans are thinking about using their Cobras for.
Yep. Yeah, and Apaches in particular, right? If you think that they were there to protect the forward line of battle and infantry, no, they weren't. They were, and the A-10, right? That's the other thing. They were going way behind lines and trying to knock out that second echelon. But Stefan, to answer your question, the answer is heck yeah. There's some great scenarios,
absolutely,
right? Because ultimately the command and control units that the enemy is going to have. I think you need a dune buggy squad to try to knock them out. Absolutely. There's a game.
I'm not sure in Europe you're going to have enough of a gap.
I think
I think that's your main problem. If you look at the troop densities in Europe, it's silly. That's why the Soviets attack in echelons.
Sure.
You can't get everything up front.
Sure.
So they have to go one behind the other.
And to be realistic, when you talk about the light division, we're talking about being able to deploy something to the Middle East.
Yeah.
And so those dune buggies were never designed to run around the European countryside, even though they did. They were designed to handle the Sinai Peninsula. They were designed to, drive through the open, terrain of the Middle East is ultimately what they were thinking.
Yeah, they're a flanking force, really.
They are.
But having said that, the Americans have got a reinforcement role in Denmark.
Yeah.
So, it's conceivable they could have ended up.
Oh, absolutely. Let's even broaden our imagination, and let's say that you really, really want to take pressure off of, let's say, what's happening in Western Germany. Why would you not put a force up and invade, Russia and all of a sudden freak everybody out, the Russians, by making your own invasion, and they have to all of a sudden shift dynamics, and your light division could do that, right?
This is absolutely true. What you've just described is horizontal escalation, which was a proper American doctrine.
Yep.
Which is what you sort of get if you trying to fight a land army, i.e. the Soviet Union, with basically an air and naval force, which is actually rough. It's pretty much the American stuff. Well, I've got all these carriers. I can dominate the waves. That doesn't help me that much when I'm trying to invade Russia, does it? So they were planning to do exactly what you said. They were planning to land on the periphery. The bad news for the Americans is they war gamed this out. In fact, if you go to DTIC, they've got the American Naval Institute's annual war game. I've got that wrong, but you'll probably be able to find it from the description. The bad news for you is Russians didn't care. they just basically ignored them because you can't get enough stuff there to threaten them particularly. You get 2 or 3 divisions. It's nothing. Yeah, they'll put blocking force in your way, and they'll just continue to do Western Europe because Western Europe is the main theatre of operations. So I'm sure the Americans would have tried it. They'd be brilliant games, but it's ultimately futile. Sorry to say this.
They say that, and I'm sure from a military perspective, it was futile, and we war gamed it out, and it didn't work. But once you get population involved, once you get the perception involved, right, it becomes a totally different thing. So I don't know. And that's what's interesting about the Cold War gaming, whether you do it at a 6mm scale or a 28mm scale or 54mm or G.I. Joe scale. It's all about what could have been, and it's those discussions that are fun to have.
Oh, absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that it never happened does make for some very interesting what ifs that you can't 100% say are implausible, can you?
Yeah, right. The other thing I found interesting when doing the research and working on AirLand battle and doing these things is those outside pressures, meaning that none of this happens in a vacuum, right? The tactics and the AirLand battle, all these things that are going on don't happen by themselves. And one of the reasons for the whole AirLand battle is politically the concept of America or NATO itself defending with nuclear weapons started to be a big no-go, right? West Germany was realizing that, well, if it's really happened, we're just going to turn West Germany into a nuclear wasteland. And somehow everybody was okay with that. And well, we're not anymore.
The French,
especially the French. I was going to say
they're the first ones to launch. And so the Americans were told that the idea of using nukes for defense just whenever, because it was convenient, wasn't going to take place. They weren't going to be allowed to do that. And so there's this shift from let's rely on nuclear, strikes to be our defense, which is the reason why the Americans during the Vietnam War thought they could hold out in Europe, because the answer is just shoot more missiles and, no big deal, to, well, we're not going to be allowed to do that. We have to win in another way.
Yeah. And another influence of politics, I suppose, is Fulda Firestorm, the Battleground HD campaign coming up. That's about 11th ACR fighting sort of delaying cavalry action right on the inner German border. The entire reason they're there is because politically, NATO feels it has to defend the border, even though the German army at the time is thinking a lot more flexibly about where can you give ground, where can you fall back. For everyone who's not German, they feel like they need to actually defend as much of Germany as they can. So they have to be up on the border.
Well, I think there's a difference between the merit of the German political stance and maybe I don't know what the military stance was, but it's very clear at the time the Germans were the people who were basically making sure forward defense was a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it sort of makes sense that the Russians have won, haven't they? Half won if you're going to give up 100 kilometers straight away.
Yeah.
And Germany's a big place, but it ain't that big.
No.
Yeah. Doesn't take long to drive from the inner German border to the Channel, as long as there's nothing in the way.
Right.
So it's dangerous. Gentlemen, I reckon we've overdone our half an hour. So we probably ought to be winding down. Stephanie, have you got any final comments, things to say?
Not to jump ahead too much on, well, I don't want to give away that there's a script, but I know we had discussed, one of the questions I was interested in before we jumped on was the idea of anyone who wants to modify any of the stuff they're picking up in AirLand Battle and Reforger. I know I'm amazed every time by how many people want to pick up the Blender files that I let people buy for my Kickstarters, which are the building blocks that all the figures are made out of that you can edit in Blender's sculpting software. And yeah, I found that kind of interesting that people want to do that. So I thought I would give a quick tip on anyone who wants to do that.
Oh, please do. Yes.
Your computer screen is lying to you. If you want to edit, edit a War Games figure, if it looks good on your computer screen, you need to bump up all the details about 50% more than you have. So that is my top tip for anybody.
You mean make them wider, make them bigger, make them stick wider. Out. Yeah, exactly. I'd agree with that. If you're doing small scale stuff, you have to exaggerate. Absolutely right.
100%. If it looks good in a render, it will not look good once you printed it. That's my top
and
tip.
that's really difficult. I fall foul of that. And I've been doing it for ages.
Absolutely.
Brad, any last comments you'd like to say?
The only thing I'll say is Firestorm is coming quickly. The whole intro to Firestorm, say that 3 times, is kind of a background all about AirLand Battle and Army 86. So if you want like a 2-page overview of it, that's going to be in there. So, which I find very, very fascinating. I could talk about it for hours.
I've heard about the opening scenario, and I'm very, very excited to play it. It sounds very cool.
It's very, very cool. But the Battleground HD side is only a part of my life. The other side is Bob Mac 3D. And I can't tell you how excited I've been about this Kickstarter. I will tell everybody that's listening that I talked Bob into doing these vehicles. He is not a dune buggy kind of guy when it comes to wargaming. He's much more big tank, big formations. I'm more of a skirmish guy, so the idea of having dune buggies or smaller type of fun vehicles is in my wheelhouse. So I did talk him into doing this one. So thank you very much, Bob.
Yeah, and to be honest, that Fav is super cool, but not quite as cool as the HTSV GTL.
Oh, I learned a lot about it.
Which, to be fair, is the sexiest American vehicle ever.
The ultimate what if as well.
Should have replaced the Sheridan. Should be
and the M1 and the Bradley. And in fact, they should just have bought that. To be honest,
it was the whole idea and concept is very, very cool. Very 80s. Very cool. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that. I think we should sign off. Don't forget the AirLand Battle Kickstarter and the Reforger Kickstarter are both now live on Kickstarter. Surprisingly enough, you've got week and a half to pledge, so please don't let it escape your mind. I've really enjoyed our little chat. It's been brilliant.
Yeah. I will make one last comment, and that is I'm going to Historicon, and I'm bringing both of the Bob Mack AirLand Battle models with me, and I will have all of Flank March, both Soviets and Americans painted up. So if you want to see them live and check them out and talk about them, I'll be at Historicon.
Go to Historicon, fondle Brad Spitz.
And game with them. We're putting on games, and so if you want to actually game with the figures and the prints, come out and play.
Awesome. Right. Well, in that case, I think that's all three of us signing off. I've been Bob McKenzie.
Brad Sanders.
Stephen Carey.
Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it.
All right. Bye, guys. Thanks.